Hi guys, welcome into this new video brought to you by Airless Discounter. Today into this new Airless tip, we're gonna look at this time how to recognize simply how old is your Airless hose, and so if you maybe have to change it, to replace it with a new one, we're gonna see the different ways we have to take care and see if it's really already damaged or not, or simply when you will have to change it, and also to see the ways you can avoid, let's say short term, to have to change your hose already. So simply for you to understand today, we're going to use as example this Wagner hose. On this type of hoses in Airless, usually you can go up, mostly like this one, to a maximum of 250 bars inside of pressure, which is pretty high. And if you compare that to a car wheel, for example, which is only working with 2.5, perhaps 3 bars eventually, you can understand quickly that you will have much more to take care of this one than of your car wheel, and if you take care already nicely to your car wheel, you have to even more take care of this Airless hose. But we'll come back to this idea by the end of the video. So for you to understand, if the hose break while you're working, what is the risk? The risk is, of course, first for the person, the user of the Airless sprayer, because then there is a risk of damage directly on the person, and of course you could be even hospitalized if such situation could happen, because the pressure being so high, you could really hurt yourself painfully. So this is of course the first thing to consider. The second thing is, if you don't forget about it, regarding simply your paint job, because then the hose is probably going to fly everywhere and you will have paint all over the place. So then it's of course work for you to recover this damage on the job site. So how to recognize on the hose visually first that it is perhaps already too old to damage to continue to use without then carrying a risk with it. So the first thing is, if you see that there is already a tear, a rip, if you see eventually a melted zone somewhere on the hose, that was perhaps due to the hose being too much close to a hot surface. If you see eventually that there is like a big scratch somewhere on the hose because it was, by the time if it was pulled on the ground or anything, then it can also damage the hose. So you have also to be careful when you are transporting this accessory. Eventually, if you see a fault somewhere, this can be also very damaging for the hose itself, and so you will have to care for it. And also if you have eventually ripped off directly. So this can be done, of course, by accident, if someone is then using a knife, for example, on the job site. So this, of course, happen not often by chance, but it still could happen that for any reason this would damage the hose itself. But in any case, if there's like directly ripped off on the hose, even if you still see the hose working and nothing coming out of the hose on the side, then this is still definitely not usable anymore. So now, what are the things you can do to avoid, or let's say short term, to avoid that these kind of situations occur? So the first thing to do is, for example, when you are rolling up the hose at the end of the day, simply, if you have already a pump with like a quick reel, for example by graco on the back, then it's easy to roll up the hose and to avoid any fold or anything like that, because it's going to have the perfect tension, the perfect distance around as diameter to not damage the hose. If you're doing this manually, then just careful to not fold the hose really too tight, to wanting to make it very small actually, simply, but then being too small and carrying a risk of folding some part of the hose simply. Okay, the second thing regards the pressure, because unfortunately we are still seeing sometimes on the internet, for example, some users or simply saying that they are keeping some pressure inside the pump when they are, for example, stocking the pump before the next use in few weeks, few days, months, whatever. This is of course completely not recommended by the suppliers themselves, by us as well. And on the hose, the repercussion will be that it will damage the hose from inside much quicker than it could have been than by simply decharging the pressure at the end of the day, cleaning of course your materials, and just leaving it then like this. Because keeping the pressure inside, as I said, will keep the tension inside the hose. It's not good, first of all, for the pump as well, and it's also then definitely not good for the hose itself. Okay, the last thing, of course, to take care of, so this is again not happening hopefully often, but we have heard about it, is to simply not have someone on the job site which is pulling the pump via the hose, because this is going to definitely damage the hose itself. It's going to damage also the link between the hose and the pump itself. It's definitely nothing to do on the job site. If you have to transport everything from one place to another, simply just bring everything together. If you are with some colleagues, just take all this together. If you're not, then just transport each thing separately to be sure that nothing is damaged. You put the hose, you transport it with the pump, and this way you avoid any tangent, any problem on the job site. So now the question remains for people that have still a hose in a really good shape, no visible damage anywhere, but the hose is maybe getting older. So the question remains, because it's still like a usable accessory, at some point it's going to be completely used and it's going to fragilize itself, so you will have to change it. So the question is, when do I still have to do it eventually, even if the hose is in a good shape? So the answer, if we are looking at the suppliers Wagner and Graco, is an advice of changing your hose approximately every 6 years, because this will be then the time where you will still be sure that your hose is still working well, but then that you avoid any simply breaking, small explosion of the hose simply on the job site. So after past that date, then of course you endure the risk that the hose gets so fragilized that it breaks down in the middle of the job. If you do that before 6 years, then at least you're sure that you won't have any time a problem on your job. Regarding the date, the informations that you could get for the hose you're having or the future one you're going to get, simply know that on every Airless hose from Wagner, Graco, Titan, farbmax, you always have imprinted onto the hose directly the maximum bars, first of all, that you can then use the hose with. And second of all, you will also see imprinted onto the hose as well the date the hose was made. So for you, if you buy it new, you immediately know, okay, approximately in this amount of time I will have to change the hose, even if it's still in a good shape. So finally, we can also take the example of this Graco pump today with this plaster hose, which, as you can see, is completely recovered from plaster on it. Could be also paint. The issue with that is that if at some point you have your hose in such a condition and if you're not able to clean it, then you definitely have to change it. This is really also, again, highly recommended. Why? Because the hoses, again, needs to be able to expand themselves when working, because of the amount of pressure coming in, especially with big pumps like Mark 5, 7, 10 with Graco Duty Max versions, or with Wagner, for example, the Heavy Coat series. In any case, you have big hoses, but all of them paint or plaster, they need to be able to expand. So if they can't, then it is a risk for you again on the job site, and so you will be recommended to change it. So finally, to conclude this video, taking back what I said about the car wheels in the beginning of the video. So here you have onto this hose the pure example where it is completely not advised to do, is to have here, for example, they tried, this customer, to tape simply around where they had ripped off or something, breaking somehow between the plastic and the metal here. And this is, of course, totally not viable in the future. Really don't do that. Take as example again the car wheel. You would not try to tape your wheel of your car and then try to continue on the road or on the highway with it. So if you don't do on a wheel which is just having 2.5 bars, then you definitely don't do that onto hairless hose which can have 200, 250 bars, 270 bars, or even more sometimes. So I hope this video could help you to identify when the hose is perhaps too damaged, too old, and also to know simply when eventually to change it. If you have further questions, please let us know. You can always contact us from Monday to Friday via email, telephone, messenger, WhatsApp eventually. Let us a comment if you have had eventually this issue, or if you try, or if you thought that maybe you would do something like that. This would be interesting to know how many customers are still thinking that this could work. But really take care of you and of your accessories and machines, because this is still high pressure systems. And on that, I let you give us a sum up and see you on the next one.